Evening all. Okay, I thought this week we could continue looking at the World Championship match of 1935, and we're going to plunge into game 7, I believe. So game 7, just quickly make sure from my PGN here. Yes, round 7 of this fiercely contested World Championship match. Just make sure it is okay before we go into this game. Okay, so Alekhine, Alexander playing white, played E4. Okay, nowadays a lot of World Championship matches seem to be featuring D4 a lot, but in this particular one, okay, we saw E4, and Max Euwe was a fan of the French defence. He played E6, and we get quite an unusual system being played by Alexander. Quite a shocking system from today's opening theory point of view. It looks initially like the winner, as if white's going to play E5, which is, I think, what most people play in this position. It's the most popular move nowadays. I think the influence of that, in terms of evolution of style or opening theory, I think was Mikhail Botvinnik doing a lot of work on the French defence winner in later years. But at this time, maybe, the winner wasn't so developed with E5 as a system. So anyway, Alexander had his own weapon here, which was to play Knight's GE2, temporarily sacrificing a pawn. Okay, so the pawn sacrifice is accepted. D takes E4, and the idea is, well, to get potentially the two bishops without any structural damage. So maybe, at this time, the structural damage, maybe was seen as an issue. If we look at the French defence winner nowadays with E5, because all the theory's been evolved, white doesn't mind the double pawns. So I guess with Alexander's method, okay, it seems old-fashioned, but there's quite a bit of sensible logic to it, that it's avoiding the double pawns. Okay, it's a temporary pawn sack, but if black did play bishop takes C3, then wouldn't this be quite nice? Because there's potential to regain the pawn. If black ever plays something like this, that diagonal is going to be terrible, for bishop c4, maybe f3 later, potentially, and it will be quite fun. Of course, black doesn't have to give up the dark squared bishop. The bishop goes back to e7. Okay, and we have this very interesting system, really. So knight takes e4. Black has this kind of little centre, I think it's called, with a pawn here, bishop hand in, but it's controlling useful squares. We see direct piece play across the centre with knight c6. Okay, but knight c6 is indicating it's c5. Is there an interest in c5 in this sort of position? Okay, and we see a very energetic looking move now from white, g4. Okay, which prepares this fianchetto, and it potentially threatens, dangerous space gaining, or even to be used for a kingside attack later. So this is this is a very exciting, actually, a very exciting opening concept. If this game had been played today, people would be fascinated by it. I would assume. So b6 here, so bishop g2, okay, bishop b7, and now c3. Okay, so how can black actually challenge this construction in the center? It's going to be difficult without c5. We see knight f6, and the knight supported with knight 2 to g3, black castles, and now we see this g5, very aggressive stuff from Alexander, and it gets actually very interesting quickly from here, because after knight takes, we see the defender of f6 is removed, and the soft spot is highlighted, h7. If that defender is removed from f6, then this next move, which you might think, okay, I mean, I wonder what you think white plays here. Remember, this is a World Championship match. So for those of you without qualms of going for the kingside attack that quickly before casting, you might be surprised by this next move. And the move is Queen h5. Why not, though? Because you know this is a soft spot, and there are ways to intensify the pressure on h7. And in fact, we see now a very interesting game continuation. We see Queen e8 being played, and I wonder if you can guess Alexander's next move here if I give you 20 seconds starting from now. If on Play Chess, please go to the openings book tab for these guest move quizzes. So 20 seconds starting from now. What does white play here? Okay, so someone said g6 on stream, knight f6. Anyone else? Okay, actually, you know, it was actually knight f6 Drummerjan on PlayChess. So knight f6. Yes, give yourself 50 points if you indicated knight f6. Now, what is actually the idea? Well, of course, the idea is to threaten mate. Now, let's assume black takes with the g-pawn. What would be the idea? And I hope we can work this out, because actually I only briefly did a survey of these games. I should have perhaps engine checked this particular position, but I assume that as the obvious bishop e4 fells just here. I assume it fells to f5, unless anyone wants to say something about this position. It looks as though there's no attack there. So I assume the idea is if g takes f6, then I assume g takes f6 has an advantage that actually, you know, after bishop takes f6, we can play bishop e4 without any, you know, f5, and so h7 is a big problem here. So I hope you all agree that that's the idea. Okay, which has to be avoided. This looks unstoppable here in this position, this mate on h7. Unless anyone wants to disagree with that, okay, please, this is the time. But it looks as though the idea. So anyway, Max Euwe thought it was necessary to take with the bishop. Okay, and white still ends up with this dangerous position now after g takes. We see here that again black's move is virtually forced. If g6, this looks you know, terrible, I would say. You know, queen h6 threatening mate, and here, you know, this looks like a fantastic position. It probably doesn't need much explanation, but for example, bishop g5 and then maybe castle queenside, and then rook d3 is dangerous. All sorts of things, or even the h-pawn attack might be good. So let's not go into that. In the game, g takes f6 was played, and we see queen h4, a forcing move on f6. So how is that defended? Well, it has to be defended here, it seems, and it was defended with queen d8. Okay, and then we see bishop f4, which looks as though maybe a decoy with bishop takes c7, queen f6, king g8, and rook g1 would be very dangerous. So let's just check maybe that position, although rook g8 immediately might be okay. That would help defend g7 perhaps. Okay, so maybe that's another move. There are various moves probably in this position, but that looks to be, in principle, this looks to be a threat on f6. But Max decides to play e5. Okay, and then the bishop just drops back to g3. Okay, and then now there is a threat of bishop e4 again, potentially on h7, and that is perhaps why black, didn't want to well, if he took it, it gets a bit complicated actually. Bishop e4, there's rook e8, but say castled here, we'd have multiple threats. Bishop c7 to decoy the queen, bishop e4 for h7. So that wasn't played. In fact, Max overplays f5. Okay, giving up actually the e5 pawn here, trying to get some counterplay. D takes e5 is played. So where is the counterplay? Rook g8. Now bishop f3. That was a loose piece on g2. Queen d3. It looks quite dangerous. The king stopped from castling queenside. f3 is attacked. Does look quite dangerous. Bishop e2 trying to kick the queen away. Queen e4 hitting the rook. And also offering exchange of queens. And that's taken. Queen e4. But still, the smoke cleared a bit with the queens off. But white has the bishop here, and this dark square bishop in particular is a major asset in this position, and it's used immediately with bishop h4 just to go into the f6 square. Very exciting game as far as the style of World Championship games. I think this is a very exciting game myself. And now we see h6, and now white castles queenside. h6 made space for the king, I think, on bishop f6. But still, black is in trouble here, I believe. After this check here, this diagonal is now sensitive, and this next move, f4, if that's allowed to protect e5, then that is looking absolutely winning for white. Black took on f3, and basically it looks as though this is an offer of an exchange sacrifice with bishop d3 check. That will force rook g6, would it not? But maybe this isn't so harmful here, because black has this pawn and this pawn. So let's imagine bishop takes, f takes. Then maybe there's some counterplay here anyway for black. But Alexander chose a different route here. He simply took like this. So he's pinning the knight to b7. And he's maintaining rook d7 as a threat as well, which would double attack these two pawns. Okay, then we see knight a5. So white has still a nice advantage here. And he gets a rook to the 7th now after this exchange. A rook to the 7th. Immediately double attacking two pawns. Knight c5, and white goes now material up. One pawn up, two pawns up, but black is about to get, it seems, the centre pawn back. He doesn't snap at it immediately. I think there might be a disastrous consequence, I suspect, if knight takes e5 is played here. But black played king f5. So at the moment white is two pawns up now. Okay, rook d1. Now knight takes e5. Just one pawn up. Check. Two pawns up again. And the rook now threatens rook d4. King comes off. It looks pretty hopeless. Two pawns down. Check. Takes the rook off. Rook d4, kicking the knight. And now Alexander goes for the h6 pawn with rook h4. That's protected for a moment, but now rook b4 attacking b6. And here it seems, well, Max felt the position was hopeless now and resigned. I thought this was an interesting game. I don't know about you guys, the opening, etc. It was quite an interesting game. Let's have a look at this system. This would be a major surprise weapon if used today. I think people would not be booking up their opening theory to knight ge2 today. So this idea seems, you know, a lot of logic to it, and white seems to get a nice position with a ready-made attack in the form of that g pawn. So his queen pounced on the king side. Nice little tactical idea, knight f6, which caused some damage really to black, giving up the dark square bishop, giving white this lovely bishop pair. In particular, this is like a trump card to be used now. So queen d8, bishop f4. Okay, so e5, black starts playing very committedly with these pawns, and we saw in the game now f5 being tried. Okay, actually that, of course, it did attack the queen here, but black wasn't interested in taking the queen. That would just further white's development and for the bishop to be readily installed on f6. So that was ignored. So bishop f3 again ignored for queen d3. That was the idea, to cause white some problems like this, not to take on h4. And then okay, offering the exchange of queens here, with the hope that maybe this pawn would be useful or this diagonal would be useful. But as it turned out, white castling queenside was ready made for d7, and this bishop was eyeing d8, so there was no challenge possible on that d file. So that was another aspect to consider here. Bishop d3 looks tempting, but it wasn't played. Instead, just playing on smaller advantages, just with the idea of the rook coming here, pinning down the knight. So a very painful position for black, I think, in this position. I think everyone will agree that this is a painful position for black. So this sees white going up in material, and without too many problems to solve, basically. So black soon resigned. So let's go now on to, believe it or not, there weren't too many draws before the next decisive game of the match. In fact, the next game of the match was a decisive game. So in game 8, so the 1935 World Championship match, game 8 now, so they switch over colours. Okay, so let's have a look at game 8. Systematically, it might not be as exciting as some other games like the one we've just seen. Okay, but let's have a look at it anyway. So Max, overplaying white, played d4, and we saw the Slav defense, which is very, very popular nowadays. So this looks like a modern World Championship game. The Slav has made many, many appearances, but I think I suspect the Queen's game declined, or Roy Lopez's rule generally World Championship matches. But the Slav is staking a huge claim, more and more, I think, in World Championship matches. And we see this a6, which actually looks like a trendy modern system, a6. Now here white reacted with c5, just marking out that kind of weakness of the last move, b6, and marking out the dark squares. And if it's difficult to black to liberate in the center with e5, so if white maintains a lock on the dark squares, this would be very nice. Black immediately tries to free with b6, undermining white's pawns, and that's just taken here. So white sees that maybe this c5 square on this c file is going to be useful at some point, you know, stuff like this. And in fact, knight a4 here, we see bishop d2 immediately threatening bishop a5, a nasty pin. So that's taken, and we get unpleasant pressure on the queen side, and you know, that backward pawn on the c file. So white's openings, well, in this game, white's opening seems to have got some sort of advantage. Before this World Championship match, Max went for a few months to study opening theory. He felt that was a slight weakness of Alexander, the openings. And he also studied endgames, I think, with Maroczy, according to ChessGames.com. There's a little bit of detail about this match, which I just read earlier. So, as far as the opening is concerned, I think White's doing quite nicely here. So Bishop D7, okay, Knight E5, offering B2, and that's taken. B2 is taken. So Black has hardly developed, and he's not castling yet, and he's moving his queen like this. Is this a poisoned pawn, this B2 pawn? Of course, we've seen taking on B2 in the 1972 match, a bit of a disaster sometimes in Fischer-Spassky games, Spassky playing White. But here, this is a quieter, more solid position. It's not an E4 position, but nevertheless, White is getting on the bishop pair, and after Bishop D3, this looks unpleasant to be able to play Rook B1 and infiltrate, perhaps on the 7th rank. So Rook B8. Now here, it's probably a very bad idea to play Rook B1, because that could probably be snapped off with Queen takes B1, I assume, getting lots of material indeed. Unless the Queen wants to go back, White's going to end up losing all his material. So that's probably a bad idea. Instead, a slightly better move, slightly stronger, is King E2 with the same concept that Rook B1 is possible. And of course, if castles, you just drop the bishop. So this makes sense just to play King E2 here. At least to me, it seems to make sense. Okay, so Rook B6 is played, and now we see Rook B1, Queen A3, and Black is dropping a pawn here after some forced exchanges. So Queen takes is forcing another forcing move, and this A6 pawn is potentially going to drop. In fact, that's the A6 pawn being a reason for losing in a World Championship match occurred later, of course, in Karpov-Kasparov. Karpov in game 3 won an A6 pawn. So there's echoes of this sort of stuff in later World Championship matches. All you need to lose at this level is a pawn. So that pawn there is a potential reason for losing the whole game, just losing that pawn. So he does lose that A pawn. But we're going to get... I'll warn you in advance, this is going to be a long protracted struggle, this one actually. It's not that simple at all, because what happens in this game, we're going to see, unfortunately, from a spectator point of view, an opposite colour bishop scenario developing from this position. So A4 trying to make use of that pawn to get it to A6, where it would be quite dangerous. It's ready to be blocked on the dot squares. And this initially looks dangerous, this pin. It's parried with King D6. Okay, but we're about to get, very shortly from this position, an opposite colour bishop scenario. In fact, here, after King C7, bishop takes, we're getting an opposite colour bishop scenario, a desperado move. Instead of taking here, allowing this, a desperado tactic, bishop takes D5 here, to leave White still a pawn up. But we're opposite coloured bishops now. Opposite coloured bishops. So, is White really going to make progress? Okay, let's just whiz through the moves here. Please excuse this, but this is a very, very long game to go through. And let's just try and make out the contours of White's plan. So F4, gaining space on the king side, trying to infiltrate with the rook. It's parried all the time for the moment. Again, it's parried. And now again, a bit of clamping down on the king side. And now Black clamps down on the king side. So how can White get through this position? What is White's plan? After Rook B6, that does seem to be inviting the rook into the position. This might be a key mistake of the game. It is quite committal to allow the rook potentially to get this, and then that will be weaker. So let's see what happened. Did Alexander lose patience or something with Rook B6? Check and he goes here, rook g7, check. But we see one idea is at least to get this e3 pawn, but then again this a pawn is always ready to go. Rook takes g6, check. Bishop takes e3, hitting f4, and the rook is behind the pawn. Okay, bishop d5, important tactic on e6, very important tactic, because now check, check, rook g6. With these pawns fractured, but they seem a bit loose. Okay, bishop b7 going back again to support the pawn. Now double attacking the two weak pawns, and we see now black is starting to go downhill. Bishop takes h4 is asking for rook takes check. That would be embarrassing. If rook takes, we'd have a check. I assume that's pretty embarrassing. So just carries on with rook takes f5. So two pawns up now. Okay, and check, and rook b3. We see a bit of technique here. King coming across, and to herd that pawn. And now this is getting really critical with a8 now as a threat. And in fact, after bishop f2, here white plays a move which seems quite crushing. Can you spot it if I give you 20 seconds starting from now? So you're to play with white. How would you finish this game off? Final move of the game. What did white play here? Frank. Now, Frank Gambit, you've said rook d8. Now, come on, Frank. You've got to scrutinise the position. It's not blitz. If you play rook d8, I play king e7. What do you do after king e7? Come on. Scrutinise the position. What forcing moves can go on in this position? There's a really nice move, actually. Okay, I'm going to tell everyone. Well, the pawn's about to be eliminated, right? It's about to be eliminated. You've got to do something quite quickly to avoid the pawn being eliminated. If you play rook d8 check, then surely just king e7 is attacking the rook, and then you're just going to eliminate the pawn, and it's going to be very difficult to win that. Okay, I'm going to tell you now, everyone. I hope everyone's ready. So it's bishop a6. So bishop a6. So if we take here, that's fine. We'll be a bishop up, protecting the bishop. Okay, and if we take here, now we check, wouldn't it? Check, and then we can queen the pawn and beat the exchange up. So that is the knockout blow in this game. So Max has beaten Alexander again. So he proved maybe the first time he beat him in this match wasn't just pure luck. He's beaten him again, showing that Aлекhine's beatable, of course. So, and let's just swiftly go through this game again. It's a bit of a long one. Let's just swiftly see that white got an advantage from the opening and was quite ruthless, to Max Euwe's credit, in just converting it. Even though it became opposite colour bishops, it was a grind, and he ground it. But it seems at this point black was stubbornly refusing any entry points until, it seems, this decision to perhaps go for it from a slightly worse position, maybe unjustified, to go for this rook b6. I don't know about you guys, but this seems unjustified, because white does have the advantage very clearly for that extra a pawn, but of course e3 looks like a major target here, with implications for winning f4 once e3 is knocked out, like a pack of cards. But bishop d5 was also a key move. So bishop d5. If white's knocking out e6, then f5 will be looser. So this held the balance in white's favour, it seems. And then we see white temporarily 2 pawns up, then 1 pawn up with this tactic. So you can't take the eggs of a check. So, okay, 2 pawns up. And this kind of overloading now. Eventually, the pawn, dares to go to a7 here, allowing the seemingly powerful bishop f2, and we see this knockout blow, bishop a6. So, and this just shows actually, also you've got to be so tactically alert even in simplified positions, to be tactically alert for unusual looking moves, forcing sequences, etc. And it also shows, this maybe complacency about this rule about opposite coloured bishops being a draw is not true either. You can find amazing resources sometimes and win with opposite coloured bishops. This is kind of stereotypical generalisation that usually it's drawish, but here it's been proved it's enough to win. Okay, but okay, let's go on to another game. So this is in round 9. So we get a lot of decisive games in this match. A high percentage of the decisive games for the number of games played. If you look at the 1984 Karpov-Kasparov match, there are a huge number of draws. In this match, the percentage of decisive games to draws is very low. And so why is that? Is it because of the evolution of opening theory? Is it because, I don't know. Okay, let's see. So again, Alexander plays e4 here. Okay, and we see a repeat of that French defense line, or do we? No, actually, after d5 knight c3, we see bishop b4, and instead of the knight ge2, which we saw from an earlier game in the match, we see another surprise weapon, which is a kind of rule-breaking move. You might think a rule of thumb is don't move your queen too early in the opening, but there is a slight weakness of the last move in the main line winnower, this g7 pawn. I think Nigel Short played in the simul for Nigel Short last year. It was great, and he went over this winnow again. He said the weakness of the winnow is like g7, but here it's not quite a normal winnower, but white plays queen g4 anyway, going for the g7 pawn. Okay, and that becomes a gambit now. So knight f6, black gets very active play though, so it looks quite dangerous. Queen takes g7, rook g6, and the queen returns back. So nicking a pawn and coming back. Okay, but knight takes e4. So what has white actually accomplished here from this position? Well, black can't castle kingside for sure. He's got some fragmentation of pawns. Maybe these squares are of greater interest. This next move is quite tactical in its own right, bishop d3. You might think, well, in this position, can you play knight takes c3? What would white play here? So what would you play in this position? This wasn't played, knight takes c3, but what would you play here? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. Okay. This reminds me of a variation I've looked at in a slightly different position. I assume we're all thinking it can't be b takes because of check and winning rook, right? So bishop d2. Now, okay, but the question now is, if I play knight takes a2, what would you play here? 20 seconds. Oh, come on, you're losing pieces, aren't you? Or you're losing a pawn. Or maybe you're right, sorry. I thought c3 was the strongest myself, but maybe I'm wrong. See, I think c3 is a fun one, but now I'm thinking knight c3. Maybe it's not. Maybe just as you say, rook takes a2. Maybe it's no big deal because you've still got pressure actually on the king side. I haven't actually checked this out with an edge, but knight takes a2 is carrying on greediness. I don't know, I thought c3, but rook takes knight might be okay as well. Let's not venture too much into that, okay. But whatever, it wasn't seen as good for Max to do that. He preferred in this position to play the move f5. And the knight is now supported with knight ge2 supporting the c3 knight. So we see c5. Now white takes on e4. F takes e4. Queen h3, moving the queen again, hitting h7. And okay, knight c6 is played, just offering h7 as a sort of pawn sack, and it is accepted here. Queen takes h7, queen f6. So what is this queen doing over here? Okay, what is white doing to kind of castle? Is he castling soon? Knight f4, attacking the rook, and it gets kind of hairy now. Black decides it must be good enough for an exchange sacrifice here. So black plays, Max plays c takes d4. Surely he's got enough for the exchange if Alexander wins his rook. So knight takes, and we see d takes. So we've got a lot of pawns for the exchange here, haven't we? 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, the pawns are the same. The pawns are the same, but black seems to have a lot more pawns. There's a visual illusion there, created by the fact that white has munched black's pawns over here. But the visual illusion is because there seems to be an armada of pawns in the centre. Yeah, there seems to be a lot more pawns in the centre. So for the exchange, you wouldn't want to exchange queens here and have a silly knight over here and this centre coming at you, basically, would you? Yeah. So black plays knight e7. He's just purely exchange down, but these centre pawns look pretty menacing. I hope you'll agree with that one. So white takes on e7. Bishop takes, so the exchange down. Okay, but h4 now shows that white's got bishop g5 up his sleeve, skewing queen and bishop. So queen f7, that queen exchange is avoided. Check, and now it's actually accepted. Bishop g5. Okay, black is the exchange down, but is this centre going to come to the rescue? e5, it looks menacing, doesn't it? These centre pawns, this bishop pair, well, it's about to be one bishop less if white takes on e7. But now the pawns are kind of split up now with f3. So would you say actually that the exchange sack seems to be quite unsound or sound? If I gave you a chance to evaluate this position, would you say there isn't much compensation for the exchange down here? If I gave you 20 seconds to evaluate this, starting from now. So, okay, Pat MC unsound. What, white's ahead, gag 1204, yeah. Okay, Kartik, on what white's winning, not enough compensation. Unsound. Okay, so anyway, the pawns. Okay, Max decides to play E takes F3. After G takes, we see a forcing move. Bishop. No, not a forcing move. Bishop A3, preserving the bishop here for a moment, and maybe preparing a forcing move here. And he's trying to target C2, you know, with bishop F5. Okay, so we see F4 trying to undermine the pawns again. Bishop F5. Now F takes E5. Bishop takes C2. So is this pawn going to be dangerous now? White castles with check rather elegantly. King G8. Okay, now White, Alexander, is faced with the prospect of D4 and D3, and these two pawns would surely be quite strong. You imagine the effect of two connected passed pawns on 6th rank. But guess what Alexander plays in this position? So I think this is a key move here to avoid a nightmare scenario of having to face two connected passed pawns on the 6th rank. So White to play here. What does White play if I give you 20 seconds starting from now? Okay, now many of you are saying actually Bishop E3. Let's quickly examine Bishop E3. If Bishop E3, okay, Black controls D1, yeah? So what if, well, the first thing, Rook D8, I suppose you're thinking Bishop D4. I wonder in this position what would be quite good for Black. That's an interesting question. I wonder just about a forcing move like this. Where would the rook go if you didn't want to lose the exchange? Then maybe Bishop D3, attacking the rook, and then potentially there's, you know, a runner here. So Alexander didn't get into that anyway. What he played here was Rook C1. He gave back the exchange because he's going to win the C3 pawn here. He's basically skewing, using the skewer tactic after losing the exchange to win a C3 pawn. So that's very generous, you might think, bringing the exchange up and offering it back. But the skewer, okay, so he wins C3, and with that, of course, there's only one pawn here, and he's got his passed pawn, and you know, he's a pawn up. Yes, he's a pawn up here. He's got c-file access. It's opposite colour bishops, but if he's got a c7 access, the rook's going to be restricting the king, isn't it? So let's see. That's challenged actually immediately. Okay. And we, you know, wouldn't mind just the bishops left, but that's refused. Rook F3, Bishop F6, again renewing the threat on the bishop. So that's the move. Check, and we potentially now got a rook on the 7th coming in, but it's not used immediately. In fact, H5 is used, and now we see check and H6, and this pawn's quite dangerous. We've seen a dangerous pawn like this with a bishop supporting a pawn in a recent Nakamura game, actually, just very recently. So this is quite a pattern to get a supporting bishop for a passed pawn like this. So H7, now threatening Rook G8 to kind of well, maybe, but then there's checks and taking on here. It needs to be factored in. So what is the actual threat? Or is it just rook e7 and h8? I would say actually forget rook g8. The threat is rook e7 and h8 potentially, supported by the bishop to win the rook. So in this position we see check, check, and Max decides he has to give up the bishop. And it looks pretty all over now. He's a piece down, and actually he resigns here after king takes d4. It's a little bit of an outrageous opening to snatch that g7 pawn, come back, with black seemingly have a lot of, seemingly getting a lot of compensation for being the exchange down in terms of his centre pawns, not up any pawns, but just having big centre pawns. If you look at black's play, the intensity of black's centre here and on d4, it would seem black had a great position and white was being a bit nitpicky with these pawns on the king side, but it all seemed to work out. You might think, well, actually, if he didn't play c takes, let's actually review this just briefly. If say rook g7, would there have been a great move? It seems actually here rook g7 might just be knocked out straight off the bat with knight h5. Look at that. Whoa, knight h5. Is that a crushing move or what? If rook g7, do you agree? Does anyone agree? Yeah. So we can't play. Rook g7. So can we play knight takes d4? Okay, fine. Thanks. Knight takes d4. I wonder if knight takes d4. What about if we do take this rook? Okay, we allow knight c2. We play here. I don't know. Isn't this okay for white? Haven't we got a running h pawn? We've got this running h pawn, haven't we? And the knight's kind of stranded. If we go h4, oh, you say knight b5, knight b5. I think we're going to munch this knight soon, aren't we? If we do munch that knight, white will be material up, wouldn't he? If you want to play king d8, okay, yeah, maybe it's one to check out a bit with some engines. Bishop g5 is another suggestion here. Bishop g5. Oh, sorry. In here, bishop g5 check. Yeah, that looks nasty. Yeah, ouch. Where do you go? You can't go there because of the check. Okay, that's enough of that. So it was a tricky position. So that we had this tricky position then. I think if rook g5 looks a bit too clumsy, maybe just knight h5, just hitting the rook. Okay, so that exchange sack, we saw that interesting exchange sack which didn't quite work out. So counter-sacking the exchange maybe is the instructive message Alexander is giving us with this game, legacy of this game. So counter-sacking the exchange, being content with a smaller advantage but much more clear advantage, and the H-pawn is the hero, so justifying fully his opening where he won that G7 pawn to make way for that H-pawn all along from the opening. So okay, have I got another game from this, or have I run out of games? Ah, good, there's another game. Okay, let's go over one more game. So actually in game 10, now I think game 10 to me, okay, maybe I don't know, my opinion is that Alexander was drunk in this game. Honestly, I played through the game twice. I really think something, you know, maybe, I don't know, it was weird. I just found this game weird. So let's go through it. Max was white, of course, switching colours, d4, d5, c4, c6. So there were a lot of outrage, speculation that Alexander was really drunk, and in the comments of the game, you know, I think Max had offered to play the game another day, and Alexander, you know, wanted to play it on this day. But you know, have a look at Black's play. Basically, it starts off, it seems fairly solid. Okay, with a6, it seems solid so far, right? So we see c5, okay, and c5 isn't challenged immediately like in an earlier game with b6, okay, which he did end up losing anyway. But we see knight bd7 b4, and now we see a5, which already seems a little bit dodgy because of b5 as a response, and white seems to have a very comfortable space advantage. Okay, now this to me starts to look weird and wretched, because Alexander plays knight e4. Now the reason I say this is because after knight takes e4, d takes e4, knight d2, basically we've got double pawns here. If f5, which looks absolutely wretched, we'd have knight c4 to e5 in principle. We'd also have a weakened diagonal. We'd also have the possibility of playing f3. Now f3 would either have an implication of a g-file, or more pawns in the centre, leaving a pawn on e6 and leaving a dark square on e5. So positionally, I do not think this looks good to play this position with f5. Quite a few of these points about e5 and f3 we're going to see being used now over the next few moves. This looks to be already a wretched position. Now maybe it's the case that, you know, Alexander Alekhine, he's out of book and he's improvised this. But I think there is also evidence, though, he was actually completely drunk when turning up for the game. There is evidence, which maybe some of you know about this match, and you know, there seems to be a lot of evidence about that as well, because he had difficulty apparently going onto the stage for this game. But this position looks wretched the way he's played it. So f3 is played here, and now this check. Queen h6, so moving the queen a few times. Yes, either that's dynamic genius, or it's really asking to be punished, you know, because Black is not only got structural weaknesses all around the place, you know, he's a bit behind the development now. So queen e2, we see bishop e7, bishop g2, and the centre's under real pressure here. Black castles, and white is not too quick to win material. He doesn't mind just castling, letting black, you know, potentially take. Black plays knight f6, and again, you know, the queen seems designed for something on h2 here. So if you play something like fe, you might be asking for knight g4, and then also e3 and h2. It looks like knight g4 is to be avoided. But we can, of course, play on this e5 square, and this bishop's locked in behind this pawn. So this next move seems fairly logical. Knight c4. It keeps the knight out of g4 for a moment. The knight's going to come to e5. Okay, a temporary pawn sack over here. Does that matter? Bishop d8 is played. And now we see f takes e4 here. F takes. And the pawns are still fairly wretched. And the knight actually can choose now to go to d6, where it's attacking this pawn like this. It's attacking the bishop as well. Queen g6. And then we see b6. Locking down this bishop. Bishop e7. And the knight comes back now for e5 square, potentially, with tempo. Queen g5. Okay. Bishop d2, targeting if he wants a5 now, if he wants to try and win that. So Alexander tries e5 here, which does liberate, okay, the bishop. It does liberate the bishop, giving him g4 as well. It's taken, protecting g4 with the knight. And you might think, well, hang on, bishop c5. Bishop c5 fails, doesn't it, to queen c4 check. You can't play this tactic to try and undermine e5. That's out of the question. So black does seem to be a pawn down here for not much. Bishop e6, and we see rook f4 again. With black is under pressure now for another pawn. This e pawn. Is he going to lose that? Queen h6. After a3 is played. Okay, so the bishop is no longer attacking this one, freeing up the rook to join the party, maybe with rook f1. g5 is played. That rook goes there to f2. Queen g7. Black's created a few weaknesses. Okay, for the moment he's not losing e4. Rook a f1. Doubling the rooks now without any problem with the a2 pawn. This bishop's kind of hemmed in. This knight's just huge on e5. h5. Okay, carrying on. This is Alekhine really going for an attack without having the advantage. It was really established as a basic positional principle from Steinitz that the position is kind of equal until one side makes a mistake. The person with the advantage has the right and the duty to go for an attack. Now, if you've got a positional disadvantage, like here, a huge knight on e5, it's not usually, an attack shouldn't really work. This attack should not really work here. So king h1, queen h7, and now bishop c3, which implies that maybe one day, you know, the diagonal is going to be useful. h4, going for the attack still. It's just taken now with g takes h4. And Alexander not really liking his position too much. Can you guess what black plays here? What does Alexander play here if I give you 20 seconds starting from now? Maybe black's already lost. Maybe he's fed up already, and he. Can you guess what he played here? G4 looks like a reasonable idea initially. Let's have a quick look at G4. That wasn't played. G4, interesting. What would white play on g4? That's interesting. Yes. No, Alexander played queen takes h4, which has a slight weakness of the last move. So knight g6, forking queen and rook. Whoops. Okay, and this is a positional exchange sack, of course. So queen h7, knight takes. Okay, he's just blown the exchange there. But now d5 unleashes the diagonal as well. Pawn sack, so taking off a rook in there. Bishop d4, establishing that bishop's authority on the diagonal, protecting c5. Okay. Bishop e7 is now played. Queen f2, the queen is ready now to start exerting influence, maybe coming in here or here or here. Queen h4, that queen is taken there. White is winning e4, of course. So the exchange down. Bishop f5, the game doesn't last too much from this position, the exchange down. In fact, after knight c8, we see a very nice little final move. Rook takes c6. These pieces are pretty helpless here. Black resigned, Alexander resigned. If he takes b7, is queening, isn't it? Okay. So it did seem to me a bit of a dodgy game. I don't know what you guys think, but it seemed quite a mysteriously blunderful game, both positionally and tactically from Black. And knight e4, I mean, it just looks as though it's the problem with the double pawns is often going to be e5 square or f3 at the right point. So I guess you could say, well, you know, he was going for some sort of attack on the king side. It's a very, very committal way to play as Black with the queen like this. And it just went really bad. Basically, he lost the pawn. He gave up a pawn there. And I think what is worthy of examination, though, is this: if he had followed up with g4, could we actually find a good response to g4 here? I wonder. You know, what about just rook f4? So because we've got 1, you know, 2, 3 on this rook f4, and we're on no, we're not really on e4 because this will rebound on our king. If knight h5, well, we can play bishop takes e4 here because it will be check on the queen, wouldn't it? Well, you got bishop d5. Oh, bishop d5. Or maybe just check here. Queen takes g4, check here. If that bishop comes off there. So this looks pretty bad for Black, but he was in no position to go for this attack. The attack hasn't got much oomph to it. With this knight on e5, the rook's doubled here, the bishop ready. It's a pretty bad position by this stage. But yeah, there's speculation he was a bit tipsy for this game, unfortunately. But you know, he was improvising in the openings as well. That's another factor that perhaps you know, opening theory was Alexander's weakness as well. That sometimes he would get dodgy positions out of the opening. Okay, so I hope you got something out of this week. So we'll stop here, yeah. So okay, thanks, and see you next week. So I'll upload this to YouTube. Okay, thanks very much. See you all next week.